welcome to a very special episode of this live stream where I'm normally programming an NES game live on Twitch, but today we have a special guest. We have Kevin from Kahan Games.
Hello.
And it is, I'm so excited to have you here. As I was telling you earlier, because we did a little test run to make sure that we could actually accomplish this. I said I especially wanted to get Kevin, and we have Bo also lined up for a similar sort of thing, because part of the reason that I'm doing the whole live stream of NES Programming is because of the NES Assembly Line, which is a podcast that Kevin and Bo both host. So I figured if, I got this idea to get homebrewers on, and it seemed like you guys were the perfect candidates, but I didn't want to make it that you had to come on together because you are two separate people.
Yep, not a lot of people know that, but yes, we are different people.
And you have different games that you write and different opinions. That to anybody who is to anybody who's listened to the live stream, the podcast, that should be clear.
Vastly different opinions. But we also agree on many things. So
right, yeah. So first of all,
nice to get into that.
Thank you for being on here. I really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you for having me. It's a different situation being on the receiving end of things for once.
Well, so I mean, the thing for me, I wanted to get someone else's perspective on this, because this is normally just me kind of puzzling through how to make the game do what I want. And while I think people do definitely get something out of watching someone doing it for the first time and kind of learning it, I also think that there's a benefit of having someone experienced come on and talk about and in more technical detail than I think you guys can get into on your podcast, because correct me if I'm wrong, I think the podcast is kind of generally aimed at a more casually interested audience.
Oh, absolutely. And we've even gotten feedback that what we say on our watering it down type thing is still too technical for a lot of people. So,
oh, really? Okay.
We do try to generalize everything we say, kind of down to the most common denominator.
Yeah, I know it's hard. It's hard because, you're trying to reach as broad an audience as possible to get them interested in homebrew. And a large part of what homebrew is the technical aspect of it, and and learning about it, and kind of deciphering the ancient hardware that is the NES.
Yeah, and a lot of the interest that people like you and I, when we look at a project that someone in the community is doing, we can find a lot of interesting things in knowing what they had to do behind the scenes to kind of make it happen. And to the common person just wanting to play the games, they look at things completely different than what you and I might see as enjoyable.
Right. Yeah. So to start off with, I tricked you, and this is actually an interview, and you now have to write a sorting algorithm in 6502 live on stream, and
I'm gonna fail,
and it has to be O of n log n complexity. So why don't you start? Share your screen.
Let's not do that.
No,
all of those viewers that you just got will be leaving.
Yeah, no. I'm teasing, but I did want to get into. So, if you can start by talking about some of your background and how you got into, like, I know a little bit of this from the podcast, but like when you got into NES Homebrew, where was Kevin in his life at that point in time? What were you doing?
So I had just moved from Florida to Dallas. I grew up here in Florida. I dated a girl in high school, and we sort of lost contact with one another. But when we sort of started talking again, she was living in Dallas. And we sort of reconnected, and I thought it might be fun to go visit her to kind of just see how it would be, because we were sort of hitting it off, talking online again. So I went out there for a couple weeks. It was good. So I wound up actually moving out there and living with her. But it was right in like the 2007 time frame
Hmm.
when the economy tanked.
Right.
So I could not find a job out there to save my life. I had just graduated from college. I had a graphic design degree, but there was just no one hiring. So I was getting really, really depressed with my life because I was, putting in 20 applications a day, getting
Hmm.
no calls, and you
Hmm.
just start to get discouraged, and you want to find something that will sort of distract you, take your mind off of the depressing aspects of life. So,
Right.
um, I was really active. That's when Nintendo Age was first sort of starting out,
Hmm.
2007, 2008. And Bunny Boy had just he was just starting to put out the Nerdy Night tutorials. He might have had 2 or 3 weeks done.
Hmm.
So I came across the threads, and I thought, you know what, it would be kind of cool to make an NES game. I have zero programming background, never
Hmm.
programmed a thing in my life. Had always wondered how games were made, but I
Hmm.
had zilch. I had zero idea. So, sort of taking the time to read through his weekly tutorials, um, having no background, I had nothing to sort of compare it to, or it was really hard for me to make sense of them. But I just
Hmm.
kept sort of reading them and rereading them and trying to make sense of them.
Hmm.
And luckily, Nintendo H has gone through a lot of different chat room iterations, and I don't remember what sort of chat room Nintendo H was using at the time. But Bunny Boy has always been a frequenter of whatever
Hmm.
chat rooms were available. So, as I tried to make sense of these tutorials, I would ask him questions, and God, he has the patience of a saint, because the questions, as someone who knew nothing about programming, I'm sure the questions I was asking them weren't even making sense. But he like took the time to sort of answer everything I asked him.
Hmm.
And I don't know, somehow we put Frogger together. I would ask him questions every little step. I'd be like, how do I do this? And
Hmm.
he would basically walk me through it. And over the course of that game, I sort of learned how to piece things together.
And the thing about that, which is kind of amazing to me, is that you had alluded to in the podcast, unless I misunderstood, that was actually a really tough game to make on the NES.
Oh yeah.
So it wasn't like you chose something and you had probably no idea, because I can't even think about right now what the challenges of that might be, because you look at Frogger and you're like, what's the big deal? It's on the 2600, right?
Well, right off the bat, what makes this specific game hard on the NES is right away it has that sprite limitation. So
Hmm.
Frogger is constructed of various rows of a lot of cars and a
Hmm.
lot of logs. So
Hmm.
you can't use sprites to do that.
Right.
You have to use
Right.
background with sprite zero splits on every row going
Oh
opposite
man.
directions. And then you have to make basically a map that keeps track of where you are and
Right.
where the cars are. You have to, keep track of where the coordinates of every
Yeah.
car and every
Ah,
log,
wow.
and where it's collision and where it's not. So it gets overwhelming very quickly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So like for people who have watched me work on the stream, like we had touched on Sprite Zero hits just for a status bar, and that's
Hmm.
one split,
Right.
right? And then we eventually switched over to MMC3 because it does the interrupt for the timer to kind of simplify that process. You didn't do it for one split. You did. I mean, how many splits are there?
Uh, I want to say 12.
Yeah. So like you had to have the timing down so tight to get
Yeah.
every single one of those lanes that you were changing with every Sprite Zero hit like
Yeah.
perfect.
And I'm sure that you've in your interaction with Sprite Zero, I'm sure that you've run into the fact that if it's not timed perfectly, you see the tearing
Oh
on
yeah.
screen. So yeah, basically I would have to make sure every row was perfect, and then when I
Mhm.
added PAL support, the timing's completely different.
Oh god.
So yeah, I have to have basically a detection in there to see if it's PAL or NTSC, and then have time delays for each region for every split.
Wow. So you went with no programming
Right.
experience into probably one of the toughest. I mean, it has certain aspects of it that are simple, which is
Yeah.
good because it was tough enough even without that stuff. But
Right.
you went in with no programming experience to do one of the tougher things that you could do because of how performance sensitive it is and how
Yeah.
timing sensitive it is.
And that's why if you look in the manual for that game, and even maybe on the credit screen, I don't remember how exactly I wrote it, but I
Mhm,
listed Brian as one of the programmers because I make no sort of false claims that I programmed that by myself. There's just
mhm,
no way that I would have had any idea how to do any of that stuff. So he really did walk me through it. But it was
wow.
sort of trial by fire. I was
Mhm.
forced to learn a lot of the things right there off the bat.
And so when you were getting into that, and I kind of alluded to this earlier when we were chatting. Part of what I want to kind of talk about on these discussions is like early frustrations that I think we all have when we start programming on the NES, because of what a limited system it is. Like, what were the? I mean, it sounds like there were a lot, but what
Mhm.
were the things that you remember being the most frustrating? Because I think, because people are coming in with similar experiences as you, they're not I know from personal experience getting into looking at things like 3D graphics and programming sort of more modern games. You feel like an idiot, right? You go in and you're like, I'm the stupidest person alive. I can't figure out how to do something that's supposed to be the most basic thing. I think it's important for people to know that you, especially having made so many games for the NES now,
Mhm.
you experience the same thing.
Yeah. And a lot of the problems or challenges that I ran into from the start are still the same challenges that I find myself in, 12 games in.
Hmm.
The fact that you have to do so much of the graphical updates on the background itself on the
Hmm.
NES because you're
Hmm.
so limited with sprites and there are only so many sprites you can have on screen at once. So much of the graphical load you have to basically heap onto the background.
Hmm.
And if you're trying to update, more than 20 tiles per
Hmm.
frame,
Hmm.
you're just constantly, depending on what you have going on in the game at that time, it just starts, you just start seeing graphical artifacts or
Right.
flickering or just, and trying to track down exactly what's causing them. In every single game that I do, it's a problem. And you have to like scale things back and come up with tricks like, okay, well, I'll turn off the screen for 3 frames this time and hope no one notices that it's like a little bit more of a delay before the screen turns back on.
Right.
um and like that's a big problem, just dealing with the background in general. But then the attribute tables,
Oh,
you have to, you can't make anything look too good, like especially if you're dealing with like 3D graphics for like a graphic adventure game or
yeah.
something. When you're dealing with something at a 45-degree angle, but like you run into this item not being able to use this color because you
Hmm.
have to only use this palette for a
Hmm.
16 by 16 pixel area. It's just such a pain, and you have to deal with trade-off after trade-off after, backwards trick, whatever you can do to make what your idea work.
Right.
It's
And so
just
what
tough.
what made you keep going? Because like I said, I mean, you chose something that was so challenging, and you were asking Brian for help, and I think somebody else would have been like, this is ridiculous. Why am I spending my time doing this? Basically this other guy is, I mean, I'm not saying that it was exactly like this, but this other guy is knows more about it than I am. Why isn't he making it instead of me?
Right. Um, and that's a good question. I think that I have a trait where I sort of enjoy solitude. So the fact that I'm only limited by myself as far
Hmm.
as being able to create something. So if I know that if I put in the time and the dedication to just push through this,
Hmm.
like there's nothing stopping me except for my own ability to learn. And
Right.
I take that as a challenge to myself. Like if someone else can do this,
Hmm.
I look at Rob from Sly Dog Studios
Hmm.
at the time, and I'm not trying to speak ill of him at all, but at the time, he was a janitor.
Hmm.
I was like, this dude who's making these awesome games is scrubbing toilets. Like, if he can do this, why can't I? So
Right.
I'm just looking to my peers saying, these are just normal dudes. They
Right.
don't have anything that I don't have ability wise. They might have some programming background, but
Hmm.
everyone starts somewhere. So why
Well,
not me?
and that is such an amazing point, because I think the thing that people don't necessarily realize is, I mean, I think there are a core set of people who are involved in homebrew that do have the background in, computer science or hardware engineering.
Yeah.
So like Brian Bunny Boy from Retro USB, obviously, as you said, super smart guy. uh, he always jokes that he went to school for building supercomputers, and then Cray went out of business.
Right.
um and so obviously tremendously talented and knowledgeable about homebrew. But then you get other people, like yourself, and like uh Kasumi,
Hmm.
and other people that you probably know that I haven't talked to much. But like Kasumi, he's on there constantly providing feedback and has this huge amount of technical knowledge. And I remember asking him, oh, so you're a programmer full time? He's like, no way, I could never do that. And you're like, what? You
Right.
just it pointed, you just poked like 10 holes in something that I spent 3 hours kind of putting together,
Yeah.
and then showed me a demo that you put together in 5 minutes of how to do it properly. But
Right.
and that just blows my mind that there's such a mixture of people, like you said, that are just normal people who are doing this because they love it,
Yeah.
and just super talented.
But
um
there's nothing in what we do that anyone couldn't learn. It's just finding the time and pushing through when you get to a roadblock.
right. Right. And that's again sort of the idea of, the part of the idea of these videos is to show, like, look, I've been programming since I was 13, and even I get stuck regularly on these streams.
Hmm.
And if nobody takes anything else away from my streaming, but that even people who do this professionally, get stuck on things,
Right.
then I think that's pretty valuable. I mean, you talking about the challenges that you've had doing this, I think is valuable, because people don't understand that. There's always this perception that people who are doing it and are doing it successfully, like, know everything. and
Right.
and
And no one does. I mean, I follow some professional programmers like Sarah Drasner on Twitter. She constantly, she's doing, she talks to rooms of people about her
Mhm,
programming.
mhm.
And even she says that, like, she looks stuff up online every day, like, to
Yeah,
figure out how to do something. No one knows everything. It's just
yeah,
a matter of being able to find ways to find what you're looking for, how to do something.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and that part is absolutely true. There's nobody that I know. I mean, it used to be, because the internet was not something that, even some companies allowed you to have at work.
Hmm.
um
Yeah.
you had to remember how to code from memory, and you used, your Unix man pages or whatever. But I mean, now it's like there are so few problems that people deal with on a regular basis for their normal day jobs that other people aren't dealing with. You just do a
Right.
Google search and you can find
Yep.
at least something that will give you a hint, and you'll be like, oh, right, okay, I can use what
Right.
they're doing for that problem in my problem in a different way.
Yep.
um
Yeah, the internet's a godsend in
yeah,
that regard.
yeah, we were just talking yesterday, a coworker of mine and we were talking about, dialing up on, you know 28K or 56K modems to.
Yep.
He was on IRC a lot, and
Uh-huh.
and just, looking up as much information as he could through that. And
Yeah.
It's like I used to take books out of the library because they were too expensive to buy. As a kid, that was all we had.
Yeah.
You know,
And now here
anyway,
we are.
yeah, I know. I'm gonna get out of this hole. We're back in the get off my lawn portion of the usual Discord discussions where we start making fun of modern technology and people
Right.
complaining about it. So, um, let's talk a little bit about how you design your games, because one thing that I found kind of interesting is, um, you always, or it seems to me anyway, that you have this way of kind of being self-deprecating about some of the games that you've made,
Sure.
and so and it's funny because I listened to the beginning of the podcast that just came out today on my way home from work, and Bo said something that was pretty hilarious, because you've said it yourself too, is that the incident is just a Sokoban clone.
Well, I don't think we ever spell out in that episode that someone said exactly that, and it's just become a running joke.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, someone, when I first put out the game, basically said, one person said, "Oh, there's no demo, like I'm not interested in even trying this,"
Hmm.
and then someone else said, "It's just a Sokoban clone, like there's nothing new here."
Right.
So we took those two snippets and we basically just repeat them ad nauseum.
Well, I mean, so to kind of take that at face value, what I think is interesting about that kind of comment is that what people don't seem to understand about game design and good game design is how it's an evolution of a simple idea into something um, more complete and more interesting. And it seems like to me, and to be fair, I have not played the incident, and my copy of Study Hall is coming tomorrow. So unfortunately, I could not play the real NES version to compare
Oh,
against
sure.
the Pico 8 version. But um, it seems like to me that your design tends to come from this idea of taking a simple idea and iterating upon it until, like, you're probably so sick of it you never want to see it again. Is that true, or is there more to it than
I mean,
that?
it's partially true. A lot of my ideas for games come in some essence from games I've played in the past.
Hmm.
So, there's an old PC DOS game called Manhunter. At the very end of that game, there's a little mini game where you climb these ropes and dodge fireballs, and I thought, man, it would be cool to remake that on NES.
Hmm.
So I started doing it, and I was like, man, I'm really bad at graphics. Maybe I should just make them look like a middle school drew them, because when I was in middle school, I would doodle on paper and draw little tanks and little
Hmm.
war scenes. So I thought trying to combine those two ideas would be fun, and then I just kept making levels, and it turned
Hmm.
into Study Hall, which was a lot of fun. But no, I still love playing Study Hall and the Incident, so it's
Hmm.
not that I iterate on them until I'm sick of them. But I do try to take sort of simple ideas and push them in as far as I can in unique ways.
Hmm.
I try to, because when you boil it down to, like, there really aren't that many unique games. Like, everything can be comparable to something else,
Right.
but you basically have to take something and build upon it in a unique way if you can. And I think that's where I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I think that's where I excel in
Hmm.
taking an idea and sort of twisting a little bit, and making something new out of it.
Well, I don't think there's. I mean, I certainly wouldn't interpret that as arrogance. I mean, I think there's again, at a fundamental level, all good game design really comes to finding the core of an idea that's fun and trying to tease out what makes it fun, and
Hmm.
then um how to extend that out sort of into a bigger realm. I mean, I know people from the Discord are probably sick of me referencing this, but there's that video of Jonathan Blow back in 2007, and the reason I keep referencing it is because I was there watching him talk about it, and it left a pretty distinct memory in my game design brain, which was that he talked about how he would just build all these prototypes of these really really simple ideas, and was like, some of them were dumb, and
Yeah.
they weren't good games. And then he hit upon this idea of drawing lines from this other idea he had, and that became the basis of The Witness. And The Witness obviously sold tremendously well,
Yeah.
and is a fantastic game. um but if you wanted to be really reductionist about it, like, that's all The Witness is drawing lines, right?
Right.
But it's so much more than that. Like, so for you to be like, joking about it just being another Sokoban clone, I think is kind of hilarious, because I mean, you could say that about any game.
Right.
It's just, Rocket League is just a Pong clone, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. If you reduce it enough levels, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
So,
It's fun though. I love that's probably the favorite game that I've done.
oh, cool. Talk to me about how you actually do your level design, from a technical perspective, because one of the challenges I find I'm having right now is, I've got stuff loading onto the NES and the emulator and the hardware, and it works. But now we're at sort of the point where all the technology stuff is, well, it was working up until Monday, and then I ran into a problem. But it was mostly working. And then we're getting to the point where, like, now it's not a game yet. It's just sort of a tech demo. um and we need to actually start implementing something that's a game.
Sure.
And I'm torn between, like, trying to do that in the actual NES code, and or doing that in something that's a little bit more simple to kind of get things running in. How do you do your level design, especially early on when the game is still being sort of fleshed out and written?
After my engine basically supports the various assets that I plan to put in it, like,
Hmm.
when I had the paper airplane in study hall and I had the fireballs sort of falling randomly, they choose a line and it'll fall randomly.
Hmm.
I honestly just, after the engine supports it, I just sort of place things on screen. In my head, I kind of think, okay, if this is level 1, I want it to be sort of simple. I'll just put something here and something here, and
Hmm.
then I'll just try it to
Yeah.
see how it feels.
Hmm.
And there's always tweaking going on. I'll be like, okay, well, I need to move this key up 8 pixels or something. But honestly, I just kind of throw things at the screen and kind of see what sticks. And then after I have a level that feels good and I have multiple levels that feel good, I go back and sort of arrange them in what I think is easiest to what I think is hardest. And after I play through the game and kind of see how things feel as a whole, there's still more tweaking going on. But I never sit back from the start and plan things out on paper or anything like
Hmm.
that, because I don't think you can get a really good sense of how it would play until you're physically playing it and seeing how it feels.
No, I agree. And I mean, so then when you're writing the code, are you purposely writing your code in such a way that you can get your assets in with minimal headache from the very
Yeah.
beginning?
Yeah, because when I mean, I'm just going to use the study hall and the incident as my two examples because those are sort of arcadey type games with
Hmm.
multiple levels. Um, but I kind of know from the start, as the game progresses, what I'm going to like, how I'm going to iterate on an idea. Like, I'm going to add this item at some point to make the game a little bit harder. I'm going to add this enemy at a certain point to make the game a little bit harder. So I program in the ability to add that stuff in from the start. I don't know how I'm going to do it, like how it's actually going to play out, but
Hmm.
the code is in there to make it very easy to add that item in at some point. So,
Okay.
when I get to level 3 and I say, okay, I want to add the fireball to drop on me, I just basically, in my code, I have a place where I can say, okay, in this level, the fireball is active. And
Hmm.
then it just picks a random row and drops on me, and I'll say, "Oh God, that's way too fast. I need to delay it longer before it falls down,"
Right.
or things like that, and just tweak items as I go.
Okay. And so then you're not building, like, I know a lot of the people in the Discord talk about, they've built different tool chains and map editors and stuff like that. It sounds like you're just working directly in code.
I would kill for the ability to do that. But since I've only taught myself assembly language and to a lesser degree Lua, since I poked around a little bit in Pico 8, but I've already forgotten everything. I just don't have the ability or the knowledge to build tools. I don't possess that knowledge, and I'm sure that I could if I
Hmm.
wanted to, just like I learned assembly, push myself to learn, how to program that stuff in C or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
But I've developed a workflow that works for me and has for so long
Hmm.
that I don't really need to change things up at this point because I have a familiarity with my process, and I haven't run into it not working for me yet. So
Huh.
I don't need to introduce anything new into my routine.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it almost sounds like, on the one hand, there's obviously a benefit of having some of these tools, or else people wouldn't be building them. But
Sure.
um, on the flip side, it sounds like you set yourself up in such a way that not having the tools doesn't really hinder you, because you're knowing that you don't have them, you've basically focused on, okay, well, how can I get this into the game as simple as possible without them? Which, I mean, it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but
Well,
there's
no,
like
I
a
mean,
conscious effort there, right?
well, ignorance is bliss. Like if I don't know it would be easier to do it this other way, then it never crosses my mind. So I automatically in my brain know I have to do this and this and this to get my idea to work.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna have to do that.
Right.
But at the same time, that being said, I think that I scale my projects to fit my skill set.
Hmm.
So if I wanted to make an elaborate platformer, I would probably be screwed with my sort of setup and routine because
Hmm.
entering in that many assets, I think, would take a long time without some sort of tool.
Right. Well, it's I mean, if you look at what, at least at the beginning, it seems like they had at Nintendo when they were starting out. It doesn't seem like there's really it didn't seem like they had that many tools, and I don't know if that's just because nobody's kind of divulged them at this
Hmm.
point, and they're lost to time, or if it's just because computers were so slow that any tools you would have would be too slow to actually do things more quickly than you can just do by hand. Because I have posted on the YouTube homepage for all of these. It's a picture from the Nintendo store in New York of levels from Super Mario Brothers, right? And they're just drawn out on graph paper.
Right.
um and to me, that seems like it's just, in the absence of good tools, or capable tools, they did what you're doing, and that was their solution to not having a map editor was,
Right.
well, we'll just use graph paper. And there's whiteout and drawings and annotations and corrections and stuff. But
Sure.
um maybe it is possible to build Super Mario Brothers without without a tool set. I don't know.
That's mind blowing to even consider, but I guess like good game ideas, they just find a way to work. I don't
Right.
know how they did something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's that's one thing that, and maybe you can shed some more light on this. I know there was some discussion about this recently, but um I don't get a sense that people really know a whole lot about what how things were done early on, when games were actually being released, at least outside of Nintendo themselves.
Yeah, I certainly haven't seen any sort of documentation, or I think the only video I've seen is of like Tim Follins composing music and
Hmm.
what he used to compose music at that time. But programming wise, I have no idea what sort of tools. I'm sure that each of the companies sort of developed their own way of doing things, but I haven't seen any sort of indication of how they did it.
Right. I want to say, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. I thought I remember hearing that the composer for Castlevania, in order to get the music to sound right, learned how to program 6502. I I I I I'm pretty sure that's a a true fact.
That's
Somebody
incredible.
in chat will correct me if I'm wrong, hopefully. Um, and as a reminder, if you're on here listening and you have questions beyond
Yeah,
what we're
send them.
talking about, send them over. One thing to mention way early in the chat, Eugene Myers, EC Myers, asked if you're doing okay since you're down in Florida.
Yeah, the hurricane hit probably 60 miles east of me. So my town escaped barely, but my girlfriend lives basically right where it hit. So they didn't let anyone back into Panama City until this morning. She's been staying here in Crestview, but we're still unsure of basically what sort of damage has been done to her stuff. So that'll be a concern of ours going forward.
Yeah, it looks like it was a big mess.
Yeah, it's
To understate that.
the Panhandle had never been hit with a Category 4 before, so it's the worst that we've ever seen.
Man. Paul is saying there's a good interview of Nasser talking about when he coded Final Fantasies. I'll have to check that out. It's
Yeah,
mind blowing to me that they had one guy as the programmer for Final Fantasy.
I know.
Um, so yeah, that'll be. I'll have to
Yeah,
look
if
that
you
up.
could link that in the chat, I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Um, so we kind of touched upon this, but I was curious. What was the first thing? What was the first problem you hit with it, Homebrew, that made you just want to say, forget it. I'm done. I don't want to. I'm sure you would have used stronger words, but I'm trying not to.
Family
Trying to
friendly.
right. I try to, but
Um, I it's hard to say what that was because it seemed like every new step was that. But I can tell you the first eureka moment I had.
Mhm.
Um, learning assembly. I was trying to get, and I don't even think I accomplished this before I released Frogger, but I was trying to make it to where when the frog hopped, it would show him outstretched for a few frames
Mhm.
and then back to, a slightly stretched in standing position. So I
Mhm.
wanted to animate him to show him jumping.
Right.
I couldn't figure out how to do this. I mean, when you stop and think about it now, as someone who knows how to program, like it's ridiculous that I ever had this problem.
Mhm.
But to someone who doesn't really fully understand what they're doing, even when they're coding, um, I would just try to store the sprite number of his stretched out space,
Mhm.
15 times in a row. Maybe if I type it in a bunch more times, it'll delay him. No, it
Mhm.
doesn't work because it's just storing the same number over and over and over in the same frame. So
Mhm.
obviously to the end user, you're not going to be able to tell. But the day that I understood what a loop was doing
Mhm.
with like the X register,
Mhm.
and you tell it to like, increase X when X gets to, 10,
Mhm.
finish the subroutine. The day I understood loops was the best day of my life. Like I ran around my house like I had just defeated Apollo Creed and I was Rocky or something. Like it blew my mind. But loops are my favorite thing ever since I figured that out. So thank
My
God for
old
loops.
yeah, definitely. My old boss used to tell me this story. He was a graduate student teaching a computer science class, and he said that he would start with the new CS students and teach them sort of the basics of programming in whatever language they were teaching at the time, and then he'd say, okay, so they get to a point where they were doing something that was relatively simple but had to be done over 100 items or 200 items, and he'd make them write out the code on the blackboard in front of the class, and then they get to a point where they were doing that, and he'd say, all right, well, I guess we have to write it 200 times, right? And you get some of the students who really didn't understand what was going on being like, I guess so, and you'd get like one or two students who were like, isn't there some way we can like count it or something,
Yeah,
and it's funny how now that you understand it, it seems like an obvious thing, right? But
right.
it's like this it's once you understand programming, I think it's hard to remember what it's like not to understand programming.
Right.
It's like when Bunny Boy posted something about his knitting project in the Discord chat, and I commented, "Oh, this must be what it's like to talk to someone about programming and know nothing about it," because he used all these words, and later he said that he was just using every buzzword he could think
Yeah.
of, but that's what it must be like, because
Yeah.
you start
It's just
talking about,
gibberish.
yeah, you just talking about registers and O complexity and stuff like that, and yeah, man, it's
Yeah,
so
it sounds stupid to say like until you have the knowledge you don't have the knowledge, but like even like as someone who knows programming, when you read something, you have to understand literally every line and what it's doing, but when you get to that point, it all makes sense. But like
right,
anyone, you can get to that point. You just have to
right,
take the time.
right, and it's and I say this partially as a criticism, but it's not fair because it is a difficult thing to do. So this is not certainly a knock on anybody who's contributed anything to the NESDAV wiki, but I've commented a few times that it reads like a college textbook in that it
Yeah.
makes sense to someone who knows it already, but if you don't
Right.
know what they're talking about, you're just totally still
Right.
feel clueless. And it's like you said, it's like once you understand it, it makes sense, but it's getting to that point.
Right. That wiki is not for the common person. Like you have
Right.
to know what you're doing to even look at that.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the end, it's a lot of just, as I've found out, you kind of read it, you kind of vaguely understand it, and then you
Hmm.
and then you have and then you go to implement it and you're wrong, and it doesn't work, and you're like, okay,
Right.
what did I mess up? And you play with it, and then you figure out what was wrong, and you're like, oh, that's what they meant by that 3-word sentence that you kind of
Right.
glossed over.
And I found that even Bunny Boy's tutorials, and I've heard this from a couple people that have looked at them, like they can still be a little too technical
Mhm.
for the common person to get to. So I actually wrote my own set of I think are a little bit easier tutorials that I never posted online because I never wanted to face the criticism of people that know more than me.
Well,
But if
I think
anyone
you
is
should.
watching this and you've tried the Nerdy Nights and you didn't quite understand them or get through them, if you want to send me a tweet at a ton of glaciers, you could try mine and see how they work for you. Maybe it'll get you over the hump.
And that's not to say that Nerdy Nights is bad or anything, because I
Oh
don't
God,
think it
no.
is. It's especially, I think it's really um it's especially good if you're a programmer coming into the NES. It's got just the right amount of detail to get you started.
Yeah.
I think where, like you said, it's a little bit tough is if someone is totally unfamiliar. I mean, we've had people come into the Discord who like don't even know how to install CC65
Right.
because it's command line and there is no installer. And so,
Right.
it's like you really, for some people, have to start at the very beginning. And that's not a knock on anybody because,
Sure.
I mean, it looks like you are familiar with, you've been posting stuff about, gaming in DOS. And
Hmm.
um, so you at least had some familiarity with that, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So that
that's I
definitely
think
helps.
that did me a lot of good. Like being familiar with what to do on a command line if you're
Hmm.
just looking at Notepad and you have to figure out how to make a command happen.
Yeah.
Having some sort of background in that department helped a lot. But I mean, to the average person, if you say run this batch file,
Hmm.
if you're writing a tutorial that says, okay, run this batch file, if someone doesn't know what a batch file is or how to run one, I know it
Hmm.
sounds ridiculous to you or I, but like some people need to be explained how to do something
Right.
like that. So breaking down things one step further and spelling things out, I think could benefit,
Yeah.
some people.
Yeah, and it makes it cumbersome. I think there's always the need to have, I think, different tutorials for different levels of people with different experiences. And so,
Absolutely.
it's, I think you should definitely put out a supplement to Nerdy Nights, and have it, maybe it's like Nerdy Nights for Dummies or something.
Dummy nights.
Because I mean, especially with the advent of the NES Classic systems, which, like them or hate them, seem to have really brought back people's nostalgia for NES games, which, I think is kind of it's a double-edged sword because a lot of people remember NES games fondly, but as well, I know maybe Derek won't agree, but uh, there are a lot of terrible games for the NES.
Oh God, yeah, probably
And
90% of them.
yeah, and so but people don't seem to remember that, and it's kind of brought back this nostalgia for the NES games, and people now are coming in and seeing that there are new NES games, which
Hmm.
is, I think kind of mind-blowing to people. And then on top of it, you have something like NES Maker, which, whatever your opinion is on it, is bringing in a whole bunch of new people
Right.
to the scene, some of whom will, we kind of know that they're not interested in learning the coding side of things, which I understand. I mean, that's not for everybody.
Absolutely.
um but there are a number of people who, because of that, are looking for tutorials. They're doing searches on YouTube. They're coming into the Discord. They're asking questions. um and I don't know if you get a lot of emails or not of people, but I get at least a couple comments here and there of people who are you know on the NES Maker beta, and just looking for anything to be able to get their game off the ground.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting seeing, in a few months when sort of the newness of NES Maker blows over. Because in anything, and I'm the same way. If I have the slightest interest in something and I find a tool that says, "Oh, you can do what you want to do with this tool," I'll give it a try. And
Hmm.
if it doesn't sort of immediately, if I don't see that actually being attainable pretty quickly, I
Hmm.
give up. So I think it's going to be interesting in a few months to see what sort of people are sticking around,
Right.
and delving in further, saying, okay, NES Maker maybe can't do what I wanted it to do originally, but I still want to do what I want to do. What can I find that gets me there?
Right. Right. And regardless of how that ends up in the end, in terms of the success of NES Maker or not, I think the interesting thing is that they've taken on a pretty steep challenge. I mean, it's hard to make an NES game in the first place. To
Right.
make a tool to make an NES game that's not specifically specialized is also really tough.
Well, yeah, people said it was impossible for years and years and years. Like, oh,
Yeah.
is there a tool to let me do this? No. Like, it's not possible because every game's engine is different. So the fact that they were even to accomplish what they have so far with
Hmm.
NES Maker, I think it's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know, I mean, look, we've all seen the output from it, and we know the limitations. But again, I think the fact that somebody even bothered trying
Right.
is pretty
It's
amazing.
admirable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's that quote about the company or the guy who had the vision of the transatlantic cable, right? And it got done, and afterwards he said, if I had known how hard it was going to be, I wouldn't have done it, right? I mean, I kind of feel like it's going to be a similar thing, because it's a hard thing.
Yeah.
It's and it can't be encouraging when you're approaching people who are super talented in this space, and they're telling you, why are you wasting your time, it can't be done. um which is hard, because I find that the community overall is pretty welcoming
Yeah.
and positive. Um, so I mean, I feel like that might be indicative of what a real challenge it is.
Hmm.
And that brings me to something I wanted to talk about too, is like the community as a whole. How do you think how do you feel like that's changed over the years since you got started? Because you've been doing this, you said, since like 2007, right?
Yeah. Um, it's tough. I mean, at the beginning, there weren't, I don't think, many people there definitely weren't many people finishing games. There were a
Hmm.
lot of people doing little tech demos and showing sort of what is possible on the NES.
Hmm.
Um, but there weren't a lot of people actually making full games, which was bizarre to me because, like, if you have the capabilities, why wouldn't you want to do that?
Hmm.
But it seemed like a lot of the people that knew the most had no interest in making full games. They were just
Right.
sort of, they wanted to see, oh, can I get it to do this? Oh, and if I do, I'm going to document it just to show that I
Hmm.
did it, and the
Hmm.
other smart people will be impressed.
Hmm.
So it was a community of people just sort of seeing what the system could do, because in the grand scheme of things, it's come a long way in 10 years, but back then people were still figuring things out, and a lot of
Right.
stuff had been figured out, but
Yeah.
um but I think Bunny Boy's Nerdy Nights tutorials really opened the door to people, to it being accessible, and more people sort of started flooding in. And I think as more people started being introduced to it, the people that were there were very welcoming, because it's like, oh, this other guy wants to make a full game, awesome, like I want to help you do this, because like
Hmm.
it's only going to benefit the entire community.
Right.
So I think as the years went on, I think that it's been overwhelmingly positive, because when you find other people who are into like making old NES games, like I know in real life when I go to work and I come home and the people I interact with, like they think it's cool, but they don't really care. Like I can't
Hmm.
sit there and talk to them about it, for
Hmm.
4 hours and them give a crap.
Hmm.
But finding people online who say they want to do the same thing that I'm doing, like why would I not want to be welcoming to them and like try
Right.
to do everything I can to help them? So I think that the community's changed in that it's grown, and it's only grown in a positive way, because the people who are making games and finishing games, that wasn't common back then.
Right.
So finishing projects now and finding other people that are encouraging me and other people to finish projects, it's just awesome.
Yeah. No, and that's an interesting contrast. I think the other thing that I really appreciated coming into this was, I mean, and you and Bo do a really good job of conveying this on the podcast, but it wasn't clear to me by listening to the podcast alone that the the sincerity and the care about what's being done is kind of universal. And like you said, I think it's because it's an old system, and in a certain sense, it's like, I mean, maybe more so now they do. Maybe there's you were joking about that on the podcast, the homebrew bubble, right? Um, but but there are these group of people that do really care about the thing, and they're doing it because they love doing it. And
Yeah.
um I so I'm trying to think of like how to organize all these thoughts that are now swirling to kind of put it to you and see what you think. But like, I mean, you kind of alluded to, people, at work, they go to work and they do what they have to, because it's work, and you have to make
Mhm.
money somehow. But there are very few vocations or jobs or professions or whatever you want to call them that I feel like people go and do because they like sincerely, deeply care about it or love it. Um, I can think of a couple off the top of my head, I've been listening to. I don't know if you know who Rob Paulson is. He's a voice actor.
Isn't
He
that what they called that guy in Fight Club, Robert Paulson?
is it.
Yeah.
He did the voice of Pinky from Pinky and the Brain,
Okay.
and Yakko from Animaniacs, and he does a podcast about where he interviews voice actors. And I feel like it's the same thing. You listen to them talk about what they do. I mean, and granted, it's a cool job, right? Like, they go in and
Absolutely.
they do voices, and they get paid a lot of money to do it. But they love what they do. And listening to you and Bo and talking to folks in the Discord, and listening to the interviews that you do, and like even the Micro Mages Kickstarter, the video that they put together, like you could tell there's like this real care and love that goes into what's being done that I don't think happens often, just in general.
Well, yeah, and I think and I don't know kind of what everyone else's background is, but when I think back to the mid 80s and early 90s during the NES's lifespan,
Mm-hmm.
when I think back to my time playing those games, and I'm sure, nostalgia is a big part of it, but just like thinking about how happy I was and how just like sitting down to play Ninja Turtles at my grandma's house in Ohio, like
Mm-hmm.
I just have these memories burned into my head. So the fact that I can make a sprite go across the screen
Mm-hmm.
on the very same system
Mm-hmm.
that I have these very intense, like deep feelings and memories of, like, I can't think of anything better than that. I can create new games on that very same system.
Right.
Like when I stop and think about that, it blows my mind. And I know it sounds silly, or maybe I'm being dramatic, but it's just so special to me. So like the fact that I can share that with other people
Mm-hmm.
who care at least to some degree the same way that I do.
Right.
I don't know how many scenes like you can find something like that in.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. And I mean, one thing that's interesting is how you were talking about how back in 2007 there weren't that many games being made for the system, and it's interesting because earlier than that there had been a pretty strong Game Boy Advance homebrew community, and Nathan Tolbert made Anguna for the Game Boy, and I think he did a
Mhm.
DS game too, right? DS
Yeah.
version. Um, it's interesting to see how it kind of, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems like that sort of fizzled out compared to the NES and the Super
Well,
Nintendo and Genesis.
if you stop to analyze, the homebrew scene of a lot of systems started taking off when the internet became sort of super prevalent and easily
Mm-hmm.
accessible.
Mm-hmm.
People were able to get online, find information. So at the time, the Game Boy Advance was sort of the new system, and the fact
Mm-hmm.
that people could make games for that, they had interest in it, but they moved on to something else. I think as far as the NES is concerned, we're sticking with it because we have that deep rooted care
Mm.
for the system. We grew up, it was a part of our life, and those formative years, we're thinking back to that because, at that stage of our life, there were just joyous times.
Right.
So that's why I'm not moving on for it, because like it's the system that it's in my soul. I
Yeah.
grew up with it, and it's just like I can't imagine my life without it.
And so the GBA was kind of still, it was prevalent on the market at the time that was going on. Like people, you could still buy a new GBA in the store, right? Like
Yeah.
that was a current system.
Hmm.
So then what you're, I think, getting at is that in 20 years there will be a big resurgence of middle-aged people who, well, no, let's see, well, then so maybe in like 10 years there'll be a resurgence of GBA homebrew of all the people who grew up and were young playing the Game Boy Advance.
I think
um,
so. I think that I think Super Nintendo hasn't taken off because the tools required to make a game for Super Nintendo, I think, are a little bit more complicated
mhm.
than the NES.
Yeah.
And I think because GBA can be programmed with a modern language, as far as I know,
Yeah.
making the tools to make something like that is doable for a single person.
Yeah.
I don't. I think that the Super Nintendo and maybe some of the other systems from the mid '90s,
Hmm.
I think that they're going to be a little bit harder to have a community grow from.
Yeah. Yeah. The GBA you can program in C for the most part. only the really timing critical stuff needs to be an assembler. Um, but that is an interesting point because like the Super Nintendo, although it's similar in power to the Game Boy Advance, it does still require the use of assembly because the CPU is not quite as powerful, even though the graphics capabilities are very similar.
Yeah. And
Um,
definitely take everything I say with a grain of salt because I don't know what I'm talking about. These are just
well,
theories.
yeah, no, I'm just speculating too.
Sure.
Uh, Eugene is signing off for now, so thanks for
Oh
joining.
man, thanks for
Thanks for
stopping
saying
by.
hi. Yeah.
I hope to
Um,
see you at MagFest.
Oh yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit because I promised you that we wouldn't do too long, because you've got your evening and you've got work tomorrow, I assume. So, um, but so you're going to be at Magfest. I'm going to be at
Absolutely.
Magfest.
Yes, awesome.
So it's I'm excited to actually like meet a bunch of you guys in person,
Hmm.
um, because again, that's the other thing. So I told my wife about when I first started talking to everybody about all the shows and how everybody goes to all the shows, and I was so excited about it because of that sort of deep seated love and abiding reverence that everybody has for the system, but also that everybody is just so cool
Yeah.
and really into the scene. And so um, she, I told you we went to Long Island Retro Gaming Expo, and that was a cool show. But she was like, "Yeah, I'm done. Have fun, have fun." Um, but yeah, so you're going to be there the whole time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're flying in, I think, on Thursday afternoon, and
Okay.
then we'll leave on. I think we're leaving on Sunday.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll be there definitely the whole time.
Cool.
We're staying at the hotel.
Yeah, we're. I'm gonna drive down on that Wednesday before, because I have an uncle that lives down in Maryland, and then I'll be there Thursday till probably Saturday.
Okay.
So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
It'll be good to get everybody together. I've already promised several people that I owe them at least one beer. So.
It's the only reason I'm going.
So let's see. To wrap it up, I feel like every interview or question, sort of chat show has like their ending
Hmm.
that they do that they have to like repeat with all their guests. And so
Absolutely.
what I wanted to do was I wanted to start with and we'll see if I have to change these because they suck or what, but um favorite licensed game.
Uh, I have to go with The Legend of Zelda.
Okay. Yeah, that's
I feel
that's
like
near
it's a
and dear.
safe answer, but I just played too much of that game growing up to give anything else. I mean, I just have it memorized frontwards and backwards.
Yeah, I feel the same way. That was my go-to game. The game that from the licensed era that you hate the most.
Ooh, that's a tough question. Hate the most.
Because there are so many games that are so bad.
Right.
And I could tell you, I mean, I don't hate the game. I think it was more so I was so disappointed when I got it because as a kid I wasn't like we didn't I didn't have a lot of games, and so when you went and bought a game, if it was disappointing or bad, you were just like, oh my god, I can't
Yeah.
believe I just wasted all this money on this game. And that's a Boyna's Blob. I don't know, I just to this day I like it sounds like a cool game, and I remember the Nintendo Power episode where they were not episode the issue where they talked about it, and just being like, oh, what is this?
Yeah. I feel like it would be, and I don't know if it's fair to say because I'm only saying this because I never played the game growing up, but there are certain games that have a bit of sort of people look at with revenance or whatever, and like I went back to try to play them, but Wizards and Warriors, I thought the controls were just super clunky.
Yeah.
Like those early games that they just don't feel good, and if you didn't grow up playing it, I don't think that you would find enjoyment out of it. But I was very disappointed with that game.
Yeah, I went back to that one recently, and I remember as a kid feeling frustrated with how clunky it felt.
Mm-hmm.
And coming back to it as an adult, I at least felt like I could get better at it if I wanted to. But I just didn't want to.
Right. That's what I was gonna say. Do you?
Yeah, yeah. Somebody, Rick in the chat said Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, that game's awesome.
It was disappointing in the sense that it wasn't what I expected, but after getting over that, I actually really loved that game. And it was freaking hard. Like the dam
Yeah.
level was so
Yeah.
like it was a dam level, right? Like
There's almost a puzzle aspect to it because you like certain characters work better in certain areas and you just have to learn which ones to use and where.
yeah, no, and it's hard. I mean, like I still haven't beaten that one, but if somebody said, well, your punishment is you have to play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or A Boy and His Blob, I'd choose Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Any day.
Yeah, no,
Any
it
day.
was fun. I like it was just a tough game. Um and then assembler of choice.
Uh NES ASM.
Still, huh?
Yeah.
We're never gonna get you off that,
Oh
or no,
no.
or using source control, are we?
No. Well, to be honest, I tried source control, but I didn't get familiar enough with it to where it was just second nature. Like it
Mhm.
always felt like, oh crap, I have to go back and push this or something like that.
Right.
So if I can find out a way to sort of add it effortlessly into my routine, I would love to do it because
Hmm.
there have been so many times where like I get to a certain point and I just break the game and I have to
Hmm.
just like control Z a bunch and like let me try it from here. Okay, this isn't quite far back enough. Like if I had source control, it'd be so easy to just like, okay, let me start from this location.
Yeah, and that's assuming. I mean, there's source control doesn't fix everything, obviously, because you have to have committed a bunch of times in
Yeah.
between, it working and then you breaking it, which is
Hmm.
which is tough. But all right, so NES. So I think that's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with favorite licensed game, your most hated licensed game, and your favorite assembler,
No, that's good.
as a home brewer, and then anybody on the chat have any questions you want to ask Kevin or me or both of us?
Yeah, make them good.
Yeah. Derek is saying that he learned about a new GUI called Git Kraken.
Hmm.
Definitely no
It's a clever
shortage of
name.
creative. Yeah, no shortage of creative names on that. Mr. Samaflange, favorite art creation tool. Oh, that what, I didn't even talk about that. Yeah. So what do you use to create your art?
For backgrounds, I use NES Screen Tool.
Okay.
It's useful for like importing bitmaps if I want to try to like use something that's been created and try to import it and tweak it in some way. It's pretty good about bringing things in and guessing palettes at least somewhat accurately. So for backgrounds, I do use NES Screen Tool. For sprites, I've always used Tile Layer Pro. That's just sort of what Brian suggested to use in Nerdy Nights, and I've never deviated from that.
Hmm.
So those are the two tools that I use most.
Okay. Yeah, it's the palette thing is definitely a challenge because like even using something like Photoshop, there's just so many different steps involved in getting it from a format that the computer is happy dealing with to a format that the NES is happy dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, but you develop ways, as you sort of progress through the years. You find a way that works for you, and then you never change.
Yeah. um, Infinite NES Lives asks you what your favorite mapper is.
Ever since Bunny Boy introduced UN ROM 512, you know, with the flash saving, I
Mm-hmm.
I have found no reason to change from that. And then of course Memblers introduced GT ROM, which was basically the same, a cheaper version, just a different way to do it. So I've been using a form of UN ROM 512 probably for 8 years now.
Okay. a funny story early on in the streams. For whatever reason, Memblers decided to join into one of the streams, and it was one of
That's
the
not intimidating.
well, I wasn't expecting it because I mean, you figure what does he need to learn about NES programming? And and I of course hit this really serious problem that I couldn't figure out, and I kind of jokingly, if I'm remembering this right, was like, Memblers, any ideas? And he suggested one thing that I had checked, but I double checked it just to make sure, and then he was kind of like, yeah, I don't know, weird. And it was kind of like, oh wow, that was not what I was expecting. I was expecting, I mean, like you said though, like everybody
when it's when it's someone else's problem, you don't care that much.
but also like you said, everybody is kind of a normal guy, right?
Yeah,
So it's like, it's not everybody knows everything, even
yeah.
members. So that was pretty funny. Any other questions from anybody? Doesn't look like it. It looks like we've exhausted everything that everybody ever wanted to know about you, Kevin.
Well, I'm not that interesting of a guy, so.
Um, but all right, well, so then we'll wrap this, and I just wanted to say thank you again. I really appreciate you spending the time to chat with me about this. It was a lot of fun.
Definitely.
And where can people find you online?
Um, I'm on Twitter at a ton of glaciers. You can find my website at khangames.com, which is KHAN con games if you want to pronounce it like that. But you'd be wrong. I'm on Nintendo Age as Khan Games. You can find me. If you search for me, you'll find me somewhere.
Right. And then also people need to check out, if they're not already listening to it, the NES Assembly Line podcast, which is, I think, pretty much anywhere that podcasts can be found.
Yep.
Is that right? And
Yeah, iTunes, Google Play Store. It's on SoundCloud. If you Google it, you'll find it somewhere that you can listen to it.
yeah, and then you guys have a Patreon too, which I like the way that you guys did that, where you only collect for the episodes you release, not like these other moochers who get money every month regardless of what they've done.
Right. And we try to release one a month, but with both of our schedules trying to coordinate, and then whoever we're interviewing for the respective episodes, it takes a lot of work. And then editing the episodes takes anywhere from 5 to 20 hours depending. So we do our best to get them out, but yeah, we have a Patreon. We honestly have way more support than we expected, so we really appreciate everyone out there who cares enough about what we're doing to donate.
So I don't know if I should ask this, because Derek is obviously trolling you a little bit. He wanted to know how you did your fills for the Risk game you're working on.
Oh, that was with a tool. Kasumi made that tool for me, and he did it in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, that was kind of great. I really liked seeing that in real time, because there were a couple of people who were trying to figure out how to do that
Yeah.
in Python or something, and like 5 minutes later, Kasumi kind of popped out of nowhere with it's like, here, it's done.
I thought he was joking. Like, I thought he just sent me like a dummy file, but I opened it up and sure enough, it was done.
Joke about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that guy's brilliant for sure.
So, all right, Kevin, thanks a lot. I appreciate you being on here, and I'll see you on Discord and
Yeah.
Magfest, and have a great night. All right.
Thank you, you too, and thank you for everyone who's watching. I appreciate you.
All right.
Have a good one.